A pale, trembling little boy, no more than 5, clings to a battered German shepherd in the dawn-scorched Arizona desert. Blood streaks his temple. His t-shirt is torn, dust caked in every line of his face. When Border Patrol Officer Megan Price finds them beside a wrecked car half buried in sand, the boy's arms tighten around the dog's neck, refusing to let go, lips pressed tight. The dog, bristling with muscle and grime, bares his teeth at anyone who comes close, his one blue eye never leaving the boy. The world says help is on the way. But who failed them, boy and dog, so utterly that this is where they ended up alone? And what could have bound a traumatized child and an old K9 so fiercely that even the desert couldn't break them? If you've ever believed the system protects the innocent, their story will shake you to the core. Megan Price was already sweating through her uniform when the radio crackled at 5:18 a.m. A heat wave even by Arizona standards. The night shift never left her with more than 4 hours sleep, and the old nightmare always woke her up before dawn anyway. Ranger padded next to her, big and slow, the scars on his muzzle a silent story of their own. Most days, she didn't mind the quiet. Today, it felt like the desert was holding its breath. The first sign was the paw. Ranger's nose twitched, ears perked. Megan had seen this before. A scent. Something off. The dog tugged at his lead, insistent, heading away from the regular patrol path. She let him take the lead. Maybe it'd just be a coyote. Maybe a rattler in a bush. The desert had its own rules, and Ranger, though technically retired, never stopped working. They cut through scrub and brittle grass, Ranger weaving with surprising speed for a dog his age. That's when she saw it. A sedan, ancient and sun-blistered, nose buried in a drift of sand, passenger door hanging open. No fresh tire tracks, like it had been dumped here weeks ago. She unsnapped her holster, heart thumping. "Ranger, stay!" But the dog lunged forward, barking, a sound Megan hadn't heard in months, sharp and furious. He planted himself by the back seat, teeth bared, hackles up, tail stiff. Megan edged closer, badge ready, every nerve on edge. What she saw inside the car stole the air from her lungs. A boy, maybe 5, wedged between the seat and the door. Dried blood streaked his cheek. Rope marks dug into his wrists. No shoes. His eyes, huge, blue, wild, darted from Megan to Ranger and back, frozen like prey. "Hey, buddy," Megan said gently, holding up her hands. "It's okay. I'm here to help." But the boy whimpered, drawing his knees to his chest. When Megan tried to edge closer, Ranger blocked her with his body, standing guard over the child. She'd never seen him like this, not even in the worst busts on the border, not even when shots were fired. It took 3 minutes for her to radio it in, voice shaking. "This is Officer Price. Need immediate backup, mile marker 72. Child in distress. Possible abduction. Medical and law enforcement. Now." Those minutes stretched. The boy didn't say a word. Ranger wouldn't let anyone but the boy touch him. Even when the paramedics arrived, 2 tough women used to the worst the desert could throw at them. Ranger kept snarling, the boy clinging to his fur. Megan had to stand between the K9 and the world, calming him with old K9 commands, her voice trembling. "What's his name?" one medic asked. "Is he yours?" Megan shook her head. "Never seen him before. The dog's Ranger, he's mine, but he's different with this boy." As the sun crept higher, casting long, warped shadows over the sand, Megan's supervisor, Lieutenant Torres, arrived in a cloud of dust. "Talk to me, Price." "Found them just like this. The kid's not talking. The dog's guarding him like his life depends on it." Torres crouched, inspecting the rope burns. "This looks bad, Price. Real bad." Paramedics managed to get water to the boy, but every attempt to separate him from Ranger set off a panic. Kicking, screaming, tears that seemed to rip from his chest. Finally, with a reluctant nod, Megan let Ranger ride with Ethan in the ambulance, ignoring the medic's protests. She followed in her cruiser, hands tight on the wheel. Ranger's silhouette and the boy's tangled arms burned into her vision. At the clinic, things only got stranger. The boy, whose staff quickly learned was named Ethan, wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, flinched from every adult except Megan, and even she had to keep her distance. But with Ranger, he curled up on the floor, the dog's big body sheltering him, his tiny fingers twisting into Ranger's fur, a fortress against a world that had failed him. Child Protective Services showed up an hour later, armed with protocols and suspicion. "We need to separate the child from the animal," said the caseworker, her voice clinical. "For his safety and ours." Ethan's eyes widened in terror. He wrapped his arms tighter around Ranger's neck, shaking his head violently. The scream that came from him wasn't human. It was animal, raw and broken. Megan, caught between duty and instinct, stepped in front of the caseworker. "No, not yet. Look at him. You separate them now, you'll break him." The room went silent. The caseworker glared, but Megan didn't flinch. She saw the bruises under Ethan's collarbone, the old scars crisscrossing his arms, the story of neglect and fear written in flesh. Behind the one-way mirror, police detectives and social workers debated next steps. News was already spreading. Lost boy, loyal dog, something ugly in the Arizona desert. A camera crew rolled up outside the IR, the red light winking through the window. It was only then, through all the chaos, that Megan noticed something strange. A faded patch on Ranger's collar, half torn, barely legible. A signed, protection detail, case hash 1347. Case number. Not just a pet then. Something deeper. Something official. But what case? And what kind of danger had they all stumbled into? As the desert sun burned higher, Megan stood at the edge of the room, heart pounding, her old nightmares crowding in. Nightmares of children she couldn't save, of broken systems and bad calls. But this time, she swore to herself, she wouldn't walk away. Not while that boy looked at her with eyes full of silent pleas, and not while Ranger stood guard, refusing to trust anyone but the child he'd chosen to protect. This was only the beginning. Ethan's first night in the hospital was the longest of Megan's life. There was nothing for her to do but pace the stale corridor and drink bitter vending machine coffee, her nerves jagged as barbed wire. Outside, the desert wind rattled against the glass. It sounded, in the half-sleep of dawn, like a lost child crying. Inside the small, fluorescent-lit exam room, Ethan huddled in a corner behind a rolling chair, arms wrapped tight around Ranger's broad neck. The dog was sprawled protectively, one paw set over the boy's bare foot. A security guard posted at the door tried not to look at them. The nurses whispered as they walked by, not bothering to hide the pity or the curiosity in their eyes. Megan sat on a bench outside the room, close enough to watch, but not close enough to intrude. Her badge weighed like a rock in her pocket, heavy with all the rules she was supposed to follow. She'd already bent more than a few. She was well aware of the storm brewing down the hallway. The CPS caseworker, Miss Duval, arrived with a clipboard and a practiced frown. She marched in, heels clicking, while Megan watched, tensed as the woman approached Ethan. "Ethan?" Miss Duval's voice was brittle, all protocol and procedure. "Honey, can you come with me? We need to do some tests." Ethan's hands flew to Ranger's collar. He shrank back, eyes darting wild, breath quickening to little whimpers. Ranger rose with him, growling low in his throat. Megan pressed to the glass, ready to burst in. I need you to step away from the animal. Miss Duval tried again, her tone sharper now. It's not safe, Ethan screamed, high and desperate. Ranger planted himself between the boy and the adult, hackles up, a living wall. Miss Duval took a hurried step back. The nurses exchanged nervous glances. Megan couldn't stand it anymore. She pushed the door open, keeping her hands visible, crouched low. Hey, buddy. Hey. You're okay, Megan murmured. Ranger's with you. No one's going to take him away. The boy's trembling slowed, but he still wouldn't look up. Megan nodded to Miss Duval. Let me try. Alone. The caseworker protested, but Megan didn't care. He trusts the dog. If you take Ranger away, he'll shut down completely. Let's just give it one more night. There was a hard, ugly silence. Finally, Duval backed out, muttering about liability and regulations. Megan shut the door gently and sank to the floor. Ranger's head dropped into her lap. For a second, Megan just sat there, letting the old dog's breath ground her. She understood that kind of loyalty. Blind, stubborn, uncompromising. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept you alive. She turned to Ethan, kept her voice low and even. You want to know something? Ranger saved my life once. I was out in a monsoon, and he dragged me back to my truck. I think he's got a thing for lost causes. Ethan didn't react, but his breathing slowed. His hands unclenched, just a little. They sat like that for a long time. Ranger's tail thumped quietly, a slow, steady heartbeat in the stillness. By morning, word had spread. A local news van was parked outside, reporters prowling for a shot of the Desert Miracle Boy and his hero dog. Megan recognized one of them, a relentless, fast-talking guy who could twist a story in a heartbeat. She ducked her head, wishing she could disappear. Inside, the hospital's social worker tried her luck. She offered Ethan juice, crackers, even a stuffed bear. Ethan wouldn't touch anything unless Ranger sniffed it first. The dog ate a cracker out of the boy's hand, licking his fingers, and only then did Ethan nibble the edge. The staff exchanged looks. Whatever had happened out there, it had fused boy and dog together in a way no one could break. Megan called in every favor she had, getting Ranger officially cleared to stay by Ethan's side. Therapy dog status, she explained, lying through her teeth. It was a technicality, but it bought them time. In the meantime, Miss Duval's patience was wearing thin. She called an emergency meeting with hospital admin, law enforcement, and child welfare. This isn't protocol, she snapped, waving her clipboard. A traumatized child should not be allowed unsupervised contact with a former police dog. The risks are clear. Megan stood her ground. The risk is in separating them. Look at the evidence. Every time you try, he panics. Ranger isn't the problem. He's the only reason Ethan is calm at all. The hospital psychologist, Dr. Lin, backed Megan up. Attachment to a safe figure, even an animal, can be critical for children who've experienced trauma. Ethan shows clear signs of selective mutism. Forcing separation right now could cause irreparable harm. A stalemate. For now, the dog stayed. By the end of the second day, the story had exploded online. People shared photos of Ranger lying on Ethan's hospital bed, head resting on the boy's chest, blue eyes watching the door. If only people loved as fiercely as dogs do, one headline read. But with the attention came pressure. Lieutenant Torres called Megan into his office. Price, you're walking a line. CPS is breathing down my neck. The DA's office is calling. They want a statement. Protocol says the kid should be in emergency foster care by now. Megan swallowed. And leave him screaming? Ranger is the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Torres shook his head. You keep sticking your neck out for this boy, Megan. I know what you've been through. But if you go down with him, I can't pull you out. That night, as the sun bled red over the desert hills, Megan sat outside Ethan's room, writing in her battered leather notebook. She listed the names of every child she'd seen fall through the cracks. The system always had excuses, not this time. Suddenly, a nurse called her in. Ethan was making noises in his sleep. Megan entered quietly. Ethan tossed, whimpering, caught in a nightmare. Ranger nuzzled his shoulder, whining softly. Megan knelt beside the bed, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing. The boy's cries faded. His hand, seeking comfort, found Ranger's ear. For the first time, Megan saw Ethan's lips move. Just a whisper, barely audible. "Mama." Megan's heart clenched. She squeezed Ranger's paw, as if to transfer some of the dog's steadfast courage into her own veins. The next morning, Megan combed through missing child reports, praying for a lead. The name came up almost instantly. Ethan Miller, age 5. Mother, Angela Miller, last seen 3 weeks ago, fleeing a domestic violence call. The report was chillingly vague. Possible abduction, unconfirmed. Authorities had ruled Angela unstable, unfit. No sign of the father, no next of kin. Megan's hands shook as she read. She turned to Ranger, who seemed to watch her with solemn understanding. CPS returned, ready for battle. They brought in a stranger, a foster parent, waiting outside in the hall, paperwork in hand. Megan intercepted them. "Just let him have one more night," Megan pleaded. "Give me time to get him to talk." The caseworker looked at Ethan, then at the old K9 sprawled protectively beside him, and finally at Megan. Her eyes softened. Just a little. 48 hours, she said. "After that, I have to follow the rules. For all our sakes, I hope you find what you're looking for." Megan nodded, relief flooding through her. She turned back to Ethan and Ranger, two lost souls clinging to each other in a world that seemed intent on tearing them apart. But Megan made a silent promise. She would not let this boy become another name in her notebook. Not if she had anything to say about it. Megan's mind kept circling back to the same questions all through the gray, restless hours of dawn. Why would a battle-scarred K9 guard a traumatized boy with such fanatical loyalty? Why would a child trust an old dog more than any adult in the room? There was more to their story, a bond written somewhere in the past, not just in these desperate days. The next morning, a shaft of sunlight cut through the blinds in Ethan's hospital room. The boy still hadn't spoken to anyone but the dog. Ranger remained glued to his side, even sleeping on the thin mattress, his muzzle pressed to Ethan's chest, as if to guard his heartbeat from the world. Nurses whispered that they'd never seen anything like it, a silence so deep it seemed to absorb every sound. After rounds, Dr. Lin pulled Megan aside. "His body's healing, but his mind's elsewhere. If you want him to talk, you have to help him feel safe. Sometimes kids speak in pictures before words." Megan chewed that over as she watched Ethan draw with the hospital's cheap crayons, his hands still shaky from shock. Most of his pictures were just lines, jagged, overlapping, as if the world had no edges, only chaos. But then, on a fresh page, Megan saw something different. 3 stick figures, a tall woman with yellow hair, a small boy, and a dog with pointed ears and a big tail. They were standing together, arms linked, beneath a sun that filled the page. Over them, Ethan wrote in wobbly letters, "Me, Mom, Ranger." Megan's heart thudded. She crouched beside Ethan, tapping the page gently. "Is that you? Is that your mom?" She kept her voice soft, like she was talking to a wild animal. Ethan hesitated, then nodded, a tiny, uncertain motion. Ranger thumped his tail as if in answer. Megan studied the drawing. There was a badge on the dog's collar. It looked a lot like the one on Ranger's old harness, an official patch. Did Ranger used to help your mom? Megan asked, more to herself than to the boy. But Ethan's shoulders stiffened, his hand tightening on the crayon. That night, Megan stayed late, scrolling through every missing persons file, witness protection roster, and closed abuse case she could access. She remembered the faded patch on Ranger's collar. Assigned, protection detail, case hash 1347, the badge, the number. She called in a favor to an old friend at the county courthouse. The woman hesitated, but the worry in Megan's voice was enough. 10 minutes later, a text arrived. Witness protection, domestic violence, Angela Miller, son Ethan, K9 assigned, Ranger, transferred after incident, file sealed. So Ranger wasn't just Ethan's friend. He'd been part of a formal detail, a protector. And Megan felt a jolt of empathy, old wounds reopening. She knew what it was like to depend on a partner who never gave up, even when the world did. Later, Megan found a quiet moment with Dr. Lin. He's drawing pictures of his family. There's something here, something about why Ranger won't leave his side. Dr. Lin nodded, taking notes. The boy's attachment isn't just comfort. It's survival. Sometimes the only home left to a child is another living soul. Back at the station, Megan dug into old logs. She found redacted reports. Angela Miller, domestic violence victim, reported her husband multiple times. The threats escalated. Angela and Ethan moved 6 times in 2 years, each time after another call that went nowhere. One night, a home invasion. The case summary, responding officer Price, K9 Ranger present. Megan's pulse pounded. She'd been there and not even known. In the months before the accident, Angela had entered a federal witness protection program. The K9, Ranger, had been assigned specifically because Angela's ex was law enforcement, trained in how to break people, and even the system. Megan remembered her own old cases. Women forced to run, paperwork lost, technical errors that let abusers slip through. Had she failed Angela too? Flashbacks came in waves as Megan read the files. She pictured Angela, strong jaw, tired eyes, hands that never stopped moving as she spoke. Ethan, clutching a battered action figure, hiding behind his mother's skirt. Ranger, then younger, unscarred, tail wagging, pressing against Ethan's side in court while the judge droned on. She saw Ranger's protective instincts take shape, not just training, but understanding, as if the dog could read the anxiety in the room and absorb it as his own. Ranger had been with them through relocations, threats, police interviews, and one night, Megan remembered, a failed break-in when only the dog's barking kept the worst from happening. Megan's thoughts tangled with her own trauma. After her last deployment, she'd come home broken, waking in sweats, flinching at sirens. Ranger, already retired, had sensed her pain, anchoring her through panic and grief. Maybe that's why she fought so hard for Ethan, because she knew what it meant to feel like the system had given up on you. Back at the hospital, Ethan started to draw more. He drew dark shapes, a man's shadow outside a window, police lights, his mother crying. Ranger always in the center, a shield. When Megan asked gentle questions, Ethan only answered with his eyes, flicking toward Ranger. It was as if the boy's trauma had welded them together. One afternoon, as the hospital hummed with reporters, Dr. Lin conducted a supervised visit. Megan waited, heart pounding, just outside the room. Through the glass, she watched Ethan trace lines in the air with his finger, whispering quietly, words only Ranger could hear. The dog listened, ears cocked, then nudged a crayon toward Megan. Later, as the adults debriefed, the child psychologist explained, Some kids trust dogs more than people. It's safe. Dogs don't betray. Ranger is Ethan's anchor, the last piece of his world that hasn't been torn away. CPS, growing impatient, insisted on more interviews, hinting they'd separate Ethan from Ranger if he didn't start talking soon. Megan's anger flared. You break that bond, you'll break him. Let me try my way. That night, Megan sat by Ethan's bed, her notebook open. Sometimes, she said softly, grown-ups mess up. Sometimes they don't listen until it's too late. She listed, quietly, all the cases she'd failed, her own shame like stones in her pocket. Ethan's eyelids fluttered. He reached out and pressed the drawing into her hand. His mom, himself, and Ranger standing together in the sun. Was Ranger your hero? Megan asked. A pause, then the smallest nod. And Megan understood in that moment. The twist at the heart of the mystery. Ranger's bond with Ethan wasn't just a matter of duty. It was two souls, both abandoned, both scarred, finding their way back to hope through each other. By the time the hospital lights dimmed, Megan made a silent vow. She would fight for this boy, just as Ranger had, no matter the cost. She would not let bureaucracy or fear destroy what little trust he had left. As she watched the boy sleep, Megan traced the outline of Ranger's badge on the dog's harness, fingers trembling with determination. She finally saw the truth. Sometimes the only way to heal a broken world was to hold tight to those who'd already learned to survive its sharpest edges. And as night settled in, Megan realized the answers she needed weren't just in files and interviews. They were written in scars, in pictures, in the fierce, wordless love between a boy and his dog. The hospital's hallways felt colder the day CPS delivered their ultimatum. At 10 a.m. sharp, Ethan would be transferred to emergency foster care. Ranger would be removed and returned to Megan, or, if the dog resisted, quarantined pending behavioral review. The order came down crisp and final, signed by a judge who'd never seen the look in Ethan's eyes, who'd never felt a child's hand shake with terror at the sound of strange footsteps in the night. Megan read the official memo twice, jaw set. She'd lost sleep the past 3 nights, keeping vigil outside Ethan's door, fighting off memories she'd spent years trying to drown. How fast a child's fate could turn on paperwork and people who didn't care enough to fight. Ranger seemed to sense her dread. He pressed his head into her lap, his breath warm and steady, anchoring her in the present. A meeting was called before dawn in the hospital's cramped conference room. The players were all there. The stone-faced CPS director, hospital admin with tired eyes, Dr. Lin, and Megan's own Lieutenant Torres, fidgeting with his coffee cup. Ethan's fate would be decided not by love or loyalty, but by forms and protocol. Officer Price, the CPS director began, we recognize your concern, but protocol is clear. Ethan must be placed with a licensed foster family. Animals are not allowed in this phase, especially Police K9S. He's not just a dog, Megan argued, forcing her voice to stay steady. He's Ethan's last anchor. If you separate them, you risk doing permanent damage. Emotion isn't evidence, the director snapped. But Dr. Lin surprised everyone, speaking up with quiet certainty. Actually, it is. The child exhibits classic signs of complex PTSD and selective mutism. Forcing a separation now could cause regression, or worse, dissociation. The room bristled. Lieutenant Torres finally cleared his throat. Can't we make an exception? At least for the transition? Exceptions open us up to liability, the director replied, already rising to leave. Megan spent the next hours fighting the system the only way she knew, with her notebook. She wrote page after page, journaling her guilt over cases gone wrong, children shuffled between homes, trust shattered, stories buried. Each line was a memory she'd carried, every lost cause haunting her as she looked at Ethan's terrified eyes. She refused to let Ethan become another statistic. At 9:45 a.m., Megan found Ethan sitting cross-legged on the floor, Ranger's big head in his lap. The boy clung to a worn piece of paper, his drawing of me, Mom, Ranger. Megan knelt beside him, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. There are people who don't understand how brave you are. But I won't leave you, I promise." He didn't look up, but Ranger's tail thumped once, as if he believed her. The social worker, Miss Duval, entered with 2 armed officers. She hesitated at the sight of Ethan's death grip on Ranger. "We have to go now, sweetheart. The nice lady will take good care of you." Ethan's eyes widened in terror. He wrapped his arms around Ranger's neck, pressing his face into the dog's fur. A low, guttural cry broke from his lips. Pain and fear mingled, primal, the kind of sound that lingered in dreams. Megan's badge felt useless. She stood between the officers and Ethan, shaking. "Let him keep the dog, please, just for the ride. I'll sign anything." Miss Duval hesitated. "The dog goes to quarantine after drop-off. There's no other way." Ranger stared at Megan, sensing the tension, then shifted to shield Ethan's body with his own. As they prepared to leave, a hospital aide rushed in. Dr. Lin had found something in Ethan's drawings. One picture, left on the windowsill, showed a dark figure looming outside a door, with Ranger and Ethan huddled together, and his mother running, face full of panic. "He's trying to tell us something," Dr. Lin explained. "Look at the mother's face. She's scared, not angry." Megan squatted beside Ethan. "Ethan, did your mom try to help you?" she whispered, voice trembling. Ethan's mouth opened, but only a breath came out. He clutched the drawing tighter, tears streaming down his cheeks. Megan turned to Miss Duval, voice sharp with desperation. "Give me 5 minutes. Just me, Ethan, and Ranger. If he says nothing, I'll step aside." The director looked at the officers, calculating the risk. She relented, with a warning glare. 5 minutes. Inside the quiet room, Megan crouched on the linoleum, Ranger at her side. She took Ethan's hands in hers, gentle but insistent. "I know you're scared. I know no one listened before. But I'm here now, Ethan. Ranger's here too. We believe you." Ethan's lips trembled. He looked at Megan, then at Ranger, then back at Megan. His fingers traced the outline of Ranger's badge, and then he leaned forward, whispering, a word so quiet Megan almost missed it. "Bad man." Her heart pounded. "Was the bad man after your mom?" A tear rolled down Ethan's cheek. He nodded. "Mommy, run. Police no help." Megan's chest tightened. "Did she ask for help?" He nodded again, gripping Ranger's fur. Ranger whined, pressing into Ethan, his old eyes glimmering with understanding. After the interview, Megan brought her findings to the legal team. The drawings, Ethan's whispered confession, hospital records documenting his trauma. She attached notes about Ranger's calming effect, medical expert testimony, and, most critical, a pattern of ignored calls for help in Angela's case file. It was enough to pause the transfer. The judge scheduled a supervised court review instead. Ethan would stay in the hospital, with Ranger under Megan's watch. The news spread fast. "System on trial," one headline read. Social media lit up with arguments, some blaming Ethan's mother, others railing against child welfare. The hospital phone rang off the hook with strangers demanding justice for the desert miracle boy. Through it all, Megan felt the invisible weight of public scrutiny, but also a glimmer of hope. Maybe just this once the right people would listen. That night, Megan wrote in her notebook by Ranger's side. She recalled every detail of Ethan's whisper, the way he'd clung to Ranger for dear life, and the first fragile spark of trust in his eyes. She listed her own failures, then drew a line through each one. This time, she promised herself, would be different. She looked at Ranger, his breathing slow and steady, his body curled around Ethan's tiny form, and knew deep down that the system could only break them if she gave up. She wouldn't. Not for Ethan, not for herself, and not for Ranger, whose loyalty had become a beacon in the darkness. As Megan turned out the light, a single question haunted her. How many other children were lost because the system was too afraid to break its own rules? She resolved to fight, whatever the cost. Tomorrow the battle would move to the courthouse. Tonight, the boy and the dog would sleep, together, safe, at least for one more night. The Arizona sun rose hard and merciless over the hospital's parking lot, turning every pane of glass into a mirror of fire. Megan squinted into the heat, her mind churning with unanswered questions. The judge's stay had bought her time, but only days, maybe less, before the machinery of the system would grind forward, separating Ethan from Ranger forever. Megan stood on the curb, her back aching, watching as Ranger nudged Ethan's hand gently, coaxing the boy to nibble a stale donut from a paper napkin. It was their first meal together in days. The nurses watched from a distance, careful not to disturb the fragile truce. Even the most hardened orderlies had started referring to them as the miracle pair. The legal team was circling. News crews crowded the ER lobby, hungry for any scrap of drama, blaming, debating, speculating about Ethan's past and the dangerous loyalty of a retired K-9. Megan saw her own haunted eyes on the morning news. Officer defies court, blocks protocol. In the comments, strangers called her everything from hero to fool. She shut the TV off. None of it mattered. Only Ethan, only Ranger. She returned to the hospital room and found Dr. Lin waiting. He trusts you, Megan. That's rare after what he's been through. Don't waste it. We need more. Something to explain what happened to Angela. Something that proves she fought for him. Megan nodded, determination settling into her bones. I'm going out there. Something's missing in the records. I'll take Deputy Carter with me. She knelt to Ethan's eye level, brushing a stray hair from the boy's forehead. I'm going to help find your mom, okay? I promise. I need Ranger to stay and watch over you. Ethan clung to the dog's fur, his eyes wide with fear. But this time he didn't shake his head. Megan whispered a K-9 command in Ranger's ear. Guard. The dog's ears perked, a silent promise. Deputy Sam Carter was waiting in the cruiser, engine idling, his sleeves rolled up against the heat. He was younger than Megan by a decade, but had the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too much already. You really think there's something out there? He asked as she buckled in. Megan shook her head. I know there is. Too many things don't add up. Why did Angela vanish? Why did those calls for help get lost? And who's afraid of what we might find? They drove east, past scrubland and burned-out gas stations, following the thread of Angela's last known movements. The GPS pinged at a dusty crossroads, the remains of an old trailer park, now just blackened skeletons and melted toys strewn in the dirt. Yellow police tape fluttered like dying insects in the breeze. The trailer that Angela and Ethan had called home was a ruin. Fire scars on the aluminum siding, glass shards winking in the weeds. Megan walked slowly, boots crunching on gravel, her pulse pounding. She knelt beside a burned swing set, sifting through the debris. Carter poked his head inside the trailer, careful not to disturb anything. Over here, he called. Megan ducked through the half-collapsed door. The stench of smoke was thick, even after weeks. In the corner, She found a bundle of children's clothes, Ethan's pajamas, singed but intact, a battered teddy bear missing an eye. Most chilling of all, a series of desperate scrawled notes taped to the wall. Please help. No one listens. He found us. Police won't believe me. Megan's fists clenched. She took photos of the notes, her anger simmering. Carter found a half-burned cell phone under the remains of a couch. Can you get anything off this? Megan asked. I'll get it to forensics, Carter replied, already bagging it. Might be something left. They moved to leave, but a sharp whistle cut through the air. An old woman leaned over a neighbor's fence, squinting at them. You looking for the Miller girl? Her voice was gravel and cigarettes. Megan nodded. You know Angela? The woman spat. Knew her. She begged for help, came to my door crying at least 3 times, said her ex was back, threatening to take the boy. Called the cops, but they never showed. Said there was a mix-up with the dispatch. Then the trailer burned. Next morning she was gone. Carter exchanged a look with Megan. You see who set the fire? Didn't have to. Saw his truck, big, black, with a dented fender. Heard him screaming. Cops didn't care. Told her she was overreacting. The words made Megan's skin crawl. She pressed the neighbor for details, recording the conversation. Did you ever see Ethan with a dog? The woman nodded. That dog never left the boy's side. Smart animal. Chased that man off more than once. A chill ran down Megan's spine. Did Angela say where she was going? The woman hesitated. Just said she'd do anything to keep Ethan safe. Anything. Back at the hospital, the news grew darker. Megan's phone buzzed with a text from Torres. Ethan's father released. Technicality. Lawyers already filed for custody. CPS notified. Be careful. Megan felt the world tilt. She rushed to Dr. Lynn's office, hands shaking. He can't get Ethan, not after what he did. Dr. Lynn agreed, but her face was grave. The system isn't on your side, Megan. Not unless you have more proof. Megan made a decision, one that could end her career. She called the press, off the record. She told the truth about the burned trailer, the lost reports, the pattern of ignored cries for help. She knew it was dangerous. She knew Torres would be furious. But sometimes, the only way to beat the system was to expose it. News spread fast. The story shifted. Not just a lost boy and a loyal dog, but a mother's desperate fight, a system's failure, and a small-town police force under fire. That night, as the desert wind howled, Megan sat outside Ethan's room, her badge heavy on her chest. She watched as Ranger curled protectively around the sleeping boy, his old eyes never closing fully. She wrote in her notebook, hands trembling, how many more have to fall through the cracks before we change? The hospital was tense with whispers. Officers eyed Megan warily. CPS threatened suspension for interfering with procedure, but Megan refused to back down. Ranger, sensing her anxiety, rose and pressed his head into Megan's lap, as if to remind her, sometimes the only justice in the world comes from those who refuse to look away. Ethan stirred in his sleep, reaching instinctively for the dog's warmth. Megan sat vigil through the long, restless hours, vowing, no matter how many rules she had to break, she would not let this boy or this dog be lost to the shadows again. By sunrise, the courthouse parking lot was overflowing. Cameras, news vans, police cruisers, even clusters of protesters waving signs that said, "Justice for Ethan," and "Listen to the children." It felt like the whole world was watching. Megan parked at the far edge, chest tight, fighting down a storm of anxiety. Her uniform felt like armor and a target at once. She checked the file in her hands for the 100th time. Photos of Ethan's injuries, Angela's desperate notes, a signed affidavit from the neighbor, and, most critical, a printout of police logs showing the string of ignored calls for help. Ranger, washed and brushed, but still bearing the scars of his past, walked at her side. The old K9 wore a fresh service harness, a bright blue support animal patch stitched to his collar. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The CPS director sat ramrod straight on one bench, eyes like steel. Across the aisle, a tall man in an expensive suit whispered to a thin, gaunt man, Ethan's biological father. He looked nothing like a victim, and everything like a threat. Cold eyes, jaw clenched, knuckles white on the polished table. His attorney, rumored to be one of the most ruthless in the state, oozed confidence. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and no patience for drama, called the court to order. The first shot came from the father's lawyer. "Your Honor, my client is the biological father. He has completed anger management, his record is clean, and he's never been convicted of a violent offense. The child belongs with family, not in a hospital with a dangerous animal and an officer under investigation for interfering with due process." Megan bristled. She felt Ranger lean against her leg, a silent reassurance. The judge turned to Megan. "Officer Price, do you have evidence to support keeping the child in your care?" Megan took a breath, let it out slow. "Yes, Your Honor. Ethan was found bound and abandoned in the desert, showing clear signs of trauma and abuse. His mother, Angela Miller, begged for help repeatedly. I have hospital records, police call logs, eyewitness statements, and evidence the child's only sense of safety comes from his bond with the retired K9 Ranger." She handed over the thick folder. The judge flipped through it, her face unreadable. The father's lawyer smirked. "A dog is not a legal guardian, officer, and children sometimes form attachments to animals after traumatic events. This is not unusual. My client is here, ready to offer his son a stable home." Megan's hands clenched, but Dr. Lin rose from the gallery, voice calm and resolute. "Your Honor, as Ethan's attending psychologist, I must object. The proposed separation of Ethan from Ranger and Officer Price would cause psychological harm. The child displays clear symptoms of complex trauma, selective mutism, and acute fear responses to adult males, excluding Officer Price." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you recommend the dog's presence in the courtroom?" Dr. Lin nodded. "He's not just a pet. Ranger was officially assigned to Ethan's family as part of a witness protection detail due to the credible threat posed by the father." A gasp rippled through the room. The judge gestured for silence. "Is this substantiated?" Megan stepped forward, voice steady. "Your Honor, these are the assignment orders. Ranger was placed with Angela Miller and Ethan by Child Protective Services and law enforcement as a Protection K9. The original patch is still on his harness." She lifted Ranger's collar to show the faded official patch. "Assigned, Protection Detail, Case Hash 1347. The father's lawyer objected loudly. "Objection! That detail is no longer active. Furthermore, my client—" The judge cut him off. "Enough. I'll review the documentation." She looked to Ethan, small and silent, seated beside Dr. Lin and holding tight to Ranger's fur. For a moment, the courtroom fell into a hush. Just the boy, the dog, and the raw ache of so much loss. "Do you wish to say anything, Ethan?" the judge asked gently. Ethan's lips parted, but only a faint whimper escaped. Ranger whined softly and nudged the boy's hand. Dr. Lin squeezed his shoulder. With trembling fingers, Ethan lifted a drawing, a stick figure of himself, his mom, and Ranger standing together. the sun shining over them. He slid the picture across the table. The judge studied the crayon lines, the hope and heartbreak embedded in childish strokes. Suddenly, the father leaned forward, eyes locked on Ranger. He barked out a command, sharp and guttural, a K-9 command meant for aggression. "For springen!" The courtroom tensed. For a split second, it felt as if the whole world held its breath. Ranger's ears flicked, his muscles tensed, but instead of attacking, Ranger pressed his body between Ethan and his father, blocking the boy from view. He fixed the father with a cold, steady gaze, baring his teeth. Not in aggression, but in warning. He refused the order. The father tried again, louder, more desperate, but Ranger stood his ground, unmoved. Megan spoke up, her voice ringing out clear. His loyalty is no longer to anyone but Ethan, not to the badge, not to an old handler, only to the child. The judge's face softened, just for a heartbeat. "Remarkable," she murmured. The lawyer tried to recover. "It's manipulation, Your Honor. Clearly the dog is dangerous, unpredictable." The judge cut him off. "He's not unpredictable at all. He just showed this court exactly where his loyalties lie." After a tense recess, the court reconvened. The judge reviewed the evidence. Medical reports, official logs, photos of injuries, the neighbor's affidavit about lost calls for help, and Dr. Lynn's testimony. She called in the CPS director, who was forced to admit under oath that Angela Miller's case had included multiple lost or unprocessed requests for protection in the months before the incident. Finally, the judge addressed the room. "This is a tragedy that extends beyond this child and this family. It is a failure of our institutions, our records, and our compassion. But we have a duty to this child first." She turned to Megan. "Officer Price, until a full investigation is complete, I am granting you temporary guardianship of Ethan Miller. Ranger will be granted special status as a court-approved support animal, permitted to remain with the child at all times." The courtroom erupted. Shouts, applause, even tears. Ethan buried his face in Ranger's fur, and for the first time Megan saw a hint of a smile break through the shadows on the boy's face. The judge pounded her gavel. "This case is not closed, but for today, the system will not fail you." Megan's relief was fierce, almost painful. She knelt beside Ethan, Ranger leaning into both of them, and for a moment, the world felt safe. But in the back row, the father's eyes burned with fury. His lawyer whispered in his ear, already plotting the next move. Megan saw it. Trouble was far from over. Yet for this one day, justice had found a foothold. That night, as Ranger slept curled at Ethan's feet, Megan sat by the window, writing in her notebook under a street lamp's harsh glow. She wrote about rules bent for the right reasons, about loyalty that couldn't be trained or bought, and about a broken system that, just this once, had chosen compassion over procedure. She made herself a new promise. This wasn't the end, but it was a start, and she would fight again and again for as long as Ethan and Ranger needed her. Outside, a stray dog howled at the moon, an echo of all the wild, lost voices Megan was determined never to ignore again. News of the courtroom showdown exploded across Arizona by the time Megan and Ethan got home that night. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from old colleagues, local journalists begging for quotes, even strangers offering prayers and stories of their own heartbreak with the system. By morning, #Desert Bonds was trending, and their small town, once invisible to the world, had become a flashpoint for a national debate. But in the heart of the storm, Megan saw only the fragile figure of Ethan curled in the back seat of her car, Ranger's head in his lap. She reached back to squeeze his hand at every red light. Each time he squeezed back, tiny, tentative, as if testing whether trust could hold through daylight. As they pulled into Megan's driveway, a crowd was already gathering, neighbors with casseroles and signs of support, but also angry faces with homemade posters. Protect the children, not the dogs. Where's Angela? And more ominous, cops cover for cops. The world was watching, but it was divided. Megan lifted Ethan from the car. Cameras flashed. Ranger growled low in his throat, but stayed glued to Ethan's side. The crowd parted reluctantly, and Megan hurried the boy inside, locking the door behind them. Only when the blinds were drawn did Ethan let out the breath he'd been holding. That evening, the phone rang again. This time, it was Dr. Lin. You'll need to talk to him about what happens next. The hearing is only temporary, Megan. There's still a storm coming. Megan stared at her battered kitchen table, at Ethan tracing slow circles on Ranger's back, and knew she had to break the silence. She crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes. Ethan, do you remember the lady in the black robe at the big building? He nodded, lips pressed together. She's going to let you stay here with me and Ranger, for now. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. But there are some people who want you to live with your dad. They think it's safer. Ethan's face tightened. He shook his head, clutching Ranger. No, please, he hurt Mom. He hurt me. The words were thin and raw, but clear. Megan's heart twisted. I know, buddy, I know. But you're not alone anymore. I promise, as long as you want me and Ranger, we'll fight for you. Ethan buried his face in Ranger's fur, his body racked with silent sobs. Megan put a gentle hand on his back, feeling the old ache of helplessness. But this time she would not let go. By the end of the week, the community had split down the middle. At the grocery store, strangers whispered, some praising Megan's courage, others accusing her of undermining the law. The local pastor stopped her outside church, offering prayers for all wounded souls. Even the mayor called a town hall meeting to address growing tensions. On the night of the meeting, the school gymnasium was packed. News cameras rolled as the mayor spoke about respect for process and protecting our children. When Megan was called to the microphone, her hands shook, but Ethan's quiet gaze from the front row steadied her. My name is Megan Price, she began, her voice rough but resolute. I'm a police officer. I've seen too many children fall through the cracks. I've seen mothers ignored, and I've watched brave animals do what people wouldn't. Ethan is safe because of Ranger, and because someone finally listened. But we shouldn't have to rely on luck or old dogs. We need change. She spoke of Angela's lost calls, the neighbor's testimony, the trauma stamped on Ethan's small body. She told them gently, but without flinching, how easy it was for the system to fail, and how hard it was to put those pieces back together. The room was silent, until an older woman at the back stood up, voice trembling. My granddaughter died in foster care. Nobody listened when we begged for help. Thank you, Officer Price, for not turning away. Others shared their stories, some angry, some broken, all hungry for justice. But not everyone was on her side. The next speaker, a man in a pressed shirt, glared at Megan. You broke the rules. You set a dangerous precedent. If every cop decided to go rogue, what happens to order, to law? Megan met his stare, tired but unafraid. Order without compassion isn't justice. Rules that ignore suffering are meant to be challenged. The debate raged on, echoing through the town and far beyond. Talk radio blared with arguments. A state senator tweeted that the Desert Bonds case would be a catalyst for reviewing child welfare laws. Meanwhile, at home, Ethan began to blossom, slowly, painfully. He started sleeping through the night, at least some nights, when Ranger was there to chase away the dark. He helped Megan bake banana bread, giggling quietly as Ranger begged for scraps. On good days, he drew pictures of a house with 3 stick figures, himself, Megan, and Ranger, standing together under a big, beaming sun. But there were setbacks, too. Ethan's nightmares still came, especially after a knock at the door or a siren in the distance. Once he hid under the table for an hour, clutching Ranger after a patrol car passed by. Through it all, Megan kept a journal. She recorded each small victory, Ethan saying thank you, Ethan laughing, Ethan feeding Ranger by hand, and every setback. She called them the cycle, a reminder that healing wasn't a straight line. The town began to rally behind them. A local dog rescue held a fundraiser in Ranger's honor. Volunteers showed up to repair the Miller trailer, hoping Angela might return. Strangers mailed letters, some angry but most grateful, thanking Megan for standing up for the voiceless. The biggest turning point came when the judge called Ethan to testify, if he was able. Megan's heart nearly stopped. Dr. Lynn prepared the boy, gently explaining that he only had to say what he felt safe sharing. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed again. Ethan sat on the witness stand, Ranger lying at his feet. The judge leaned forward. "Ethan, can you tell us what happened? Whatever you want to say." For a moment, Ethan only stared at the floor. Megan watched, holding her breath. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Ethan spoke. "My mom tried to save me. She asked for help, but nobody came. Ranger protected us. Miss Megan did too. I want to stay with them, please." Tears shimmered in the judge's eyes. The room was silent. Even the father, face pale and drawn, looked away. The judge spoke clearly, her decision ringing out for everyone to hear. Temporary guardianship is granted to Officer Price. Ranger is recognized as Ethan's emotional support animal, with all legal protections afforded. This child's safety is our first priority. A hush fell, then a ripple of applause. Megan gathered Ethan and Ranger in a fierce hug. For the first time since the desert, Ethan smiled, a true, unguarded smile. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Megan held Ethan close, Ranger at her side, and spoke plainly. No child should ever have to fight alone. No dog should ever have to be a shield. We're going to use our voices and our story to make sure no one else falls through the cracks. That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch, watching the desert stars. Ranger's head rested in Ethan's lap, and for the first time the world felt just a little bit safer. The storm had passed, but the ground was still unsteady beneath Megan's feet. In the weeks following the court's decision, life at her little desert house shifted in subtle, sometimes astonishing ways. Gone were the days when she moved quietly from room to room, weighed down by the echoes of old regrets. Now the silence was filled with small footsteps, laughter, and the familiar click of Ranger's nails on the hardwood floor. Ethan settled into his new life with the fragile hope of a child who knows how quickly things can change. Every morning, Megan found him curled beside Ranger on the living room rug, their bodies a tangled knot of arms, legs, and paws. Sometimes Ethan would wake screaming, nightmares of burning trailers and lost voices. But Ranger was always there, pressing close until the fear faded. The neighbors' curiosity faded into genuine support. One morning, Mrs. Nunez from next door left a pie and a note. Every family deserves a second chance. The mailman handed Ethan a stack of letters, crayon drawings from kids across the state, many of them survivors themselves. Megan let Ethan tape the pictures to the refrigerator, their colors a riot of hope against the old chipped paint. But healing wasn't a straight path. Some days, Ethan refused to leave Ranger's side even for a minute. At the grocery store, he flinched from loud noises and clung to Megan's hand. When a stranger asked about his scars, he shrank behind Ranger, who positioned himself like a shield. Megan learned to measure progress in inches, not miles. A smile at breakfast, a whispered good night. The first time Ethan reached for her hand instead of hiding it in his pocket. These small victories were enough. At night, when the desert cooled and the sky turned violet, Megan sat on the porch with Ranger at her feet, journaling about the day. She watched Ethan chase moths in the yard, his laughter rising above the hum of cicadas. In those moments, she believed, for the first time in years, that broken things could mend. News about Angela arrived suddenly, like a thunderclap on a blue sky day. Megan was at her desk sorting through court papers when the phone rang. Dr. Lynn's voice was urgent. "Angela's been found, alive. She's in a small border town, picked up for trespassing. She's not well, Megan." The words hit Megan like a blow. Angela Miller had been missing for weeks, presumed dead or on the run. Now she was in a cell, terrified and disoriented, babbling about people trying to take her son. She hadn't eaten in days. The only name she'd whispered, over and over, was Ethan. Megan drove down that night, taking Ranger with her. The jail was small, a squat cinder block building under a flickering sign. Inside, Angela looked nothing like the woman in Ethan's drawings. Her hair was tangled, her face gaunt, eyes wide with old terror. Still, when she saw Ranger, her expression changed. Relief, hope, shame all at once. "Is he safe?" Angela's voice was barely more than a whisper. Megan nodded. "He's safe. He's with me, with Ranger. He's been asking about you." Angela's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, and Ranger, gentle as ever, pressed his muzzle into her trembling hands. Angela's story tumbled out in broken sentences. How she'd fled the fire, believing Ethan was dead. How no one would listen to her pleas for help. How the world had shrunk to a single desperate wish, that her son would be safe somewhere, with someone kind. Megan called Dr. Lynn, who advocated for Angela's release into a rehabilitation program instead of jail. "She's not a criminal," Megan insisted to the county attorney. "She's a survivor. She risked everything to save her son." After tense negotiations and with testimony from Megan and Dr. Lynn, Angela was granted supervised visits and trauma counseling instead of prosecution. The first reunion was awkward and raw. Ethan clung to Ranger, uncertain, as Angela entered the visitor room. For a long moment, the three stood silent, joined only by the old dog's steady presence. Then Angela knelt, holding out a shaking hand. "Ethan, sweetheart, I missed you every day. I'm sorry I left. I never stopped loving you." Ethan hesitated, then shuffled forward, Ranger guiding him. He touched his mother's hand, his voice tiny. "You came back?" Angela nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I came back. I'll never stop trying." They sat together side by side, Ranger's head resting on their joined hands. Megan watched from the doorway, overcome by the grace and pain of second chances. The weeks unfolded with new routines and unexpected joys. Angela's recovery was slow but steady. Under supervision, she joined Megan and Ethan for picnics at the park, sharing stories and laughter that rang strange and beautiful in the open air. Word spread about their story. A nonprofit invited Megan and Ethan to speak at a state conference on child welfare reform. Standing in front of hundreds, Megan shared their journey, the failures, the pain, and the hope that came from listening and refusing to look away. Ethan, holding Ranger's leash, told the audience, "Sometimes it just takes one person, or one dog, or one mom." People wept openly. Lawmakers promised action. Children from foster homes wrote letters, calling Ethan brave and Ranger the best dog ever. Megan knew their story had become more than survival. It was a spark for something bigger. Back home, Megan and Ethan visited the rebuilt trailer park, meeting other at-risk kids and families. They brought Ranger, whose gentle patience became legend. Local teens painted a mural on the community center wall. Ethan and Ranger, standing under a blue Arizona sky, sunlight streaming down. Ranger received an award at the town fair, Hero of the Year. The mayor himself pinned a medal to Ranger's collar as Ethan beamed with pride. Reporters snapped photos, but Megan ignored the cameras, focused only on the boy and his dog. Two survivors whose bond had healed not just each other, but an entire community. The changes rippled outward. The county passed new guidelines for child protection, requiring trauma-informed approaches and the option for therapy animals in cases of severe distress. Megan was asked to serve on the advisory board. She agreed, on one condition: no more red tape that keeps families apart. Listen to the children. Listen to their animals too. At night, Megan sometimes reread her old journal entries. Pages of anger and regret replaced now by words of gratitude, hope, and resolve. She wrote about Ranger's steadfastness, Ethan's courage, Angela's determination to rebuild. She wrote about the messy, complicated beauty of second chances. On the anniversary of their first meeting in the desert, Megan hosted a small barbecue in her backyard. Angela brought homemade tamales. Ethan and Ranger raced through the sprinklers with other neighborhood kids, shrieking with laughter. As the sun set behind the mountains, Megan looked around, at the table full of food, at Angela smiling, at Ethan's face lit with joy, and realized she finally felt at home. For the first time in years, the future didn't seem like a threat, but a promise. And when the stars came out, Ethan lay on the grass, Ranger's head in his lap. Megan sat beside them, her heart full, as Ethan whispered to the dog, "You saved me, Ranger. You saved us all." Megan smiled, knowing that healing was never finished. It was a cycle, a bond. And every day, they chose it again. 1 year after that burning desert morning, Megan sometimes found herself waking up before dawn, staring at the blue haze outside her window and wondering, how many kids were out there, just like Ethan, waiting for a hand, a second chance, or even just someone who cared enough to listen? How many Rangers, scars and all, were needed to make a difference when a system built for protection forgot the very people it was supposed to shield? As their story filtered into the wider world, Megan was asked to speak at conferences, schools, even police departments. She stood on stages beneath harsh fluorescent lights, scanning faces of lawyers, caseworkers, teachers, and sometimes just people who wanted to believe things could be better. Each time she started the same way: we are all part of a system, but systems are only as good or as broken as the people inside them. She would talk about Ethan's trust, about Angela's desperate hope, about Ranger's instinctive devotion. She described how one child's case file could vanish into a black hole of bureaucracy, or how a single lost phone call could echo through generations. She recounted the failures that led Angela to run, the stonewalling that nearly cost Ethan his life, the neighbor whose voice was never taken seriously. People would shake their heads, some with anger, some with grief, and Megan would see herself reflected in every pair of eyes. But she told more than just stories of failure. She talked about transformation, how Ethan, once silent and cowering, now made friends at school, how Angela, after months of therapy, started a support group for other survivors, how Ranger, once a tool of the state, had become a symbol of unconditional love. She reminded people that loyalty, healing, and courage were contagious. "We always want a villain," Megan told them once, someone to blame. But sometimes, the villain is the rule that nobody questions, the line on a form that nobody reads, the shrug that says, "That's not my job." Sometimes, the villain is our own fear of doing the right thing when it's risky, messy, or hard to explain. She paused, letting the words settle. In the audience, a young woman with a bruised wrist held her head a little higher. A veteran social worker blinked back tears. Heroes are just people who refuse to look away. Megan's own growth was not a straight path either. She still had nightmares, memories of children she couldn't save, old cases where rules trumped reason. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night and found Ranger already standing by her bed, as if he too could sense her unrest. Her journals grew heavier with analysis and questions. She wrote about the cracks in the system, the overworked social worker who couldn't read every file, the well-meaning judge handcuffed by precedent, the officer who checked a box and moved on. She scribbled about gray areas, moments when the law and compassion pointed in opposite directions, and there was no clear answer. What did it mean to bend the rules? When was it right to risk your badge, your reputation, your job, for a child or a mother or a dog? She realized that the most important changes started with small acts, refusing to separate Ethan from Ranger, calling out a missing record, trusting her own sense of justice even when it was inconvenient. She remembered the words of an old mentor: "Compassion is not a loophole, it's a responsibility." Ethan's healing mirrored Megan's. The boy still carried scars, some visible, some hidden deep in his bones. Some days, he would flinch at a raised voice. Sometimes, if a new adult visited the house, he would freeze, eyes wide and glassy. But more and more, he found safety in Ranger's steady heartbeat, in Megan's laughter, in the rhythms of an ordinary life. Angela's journey was harder, tangled with guilt and longing. She struggled with court-ordered therapy, sometimes railing against the system that both failed her and gave her a second chance. But at each supervised visit, she sat a little straighter. She wrote Ethan letters filled with apology and hope. Megan, watching from a careful distance, realized that justice sometimes meant letting people try again, even if they'd been broken by the first round. Their lives weren't perfect. There were fights over homework, vegetables, or bedtime. There were setbacks, a panic attack in the middle of the grocery store, a news article dredging up old wounds. Megan still battled the tension between the rules and her own heart. But what made the difference, again and again, was connection. A hand on a shoulder, a dog's warm gaze, the willingness to stay present when things got hard. Megan saw that the system wasn't some faceless enemy. It was people, each one with the power to turn away or to step forward. One afternoon, Megan led a workshop for new police recruits. She held up 2 photos, one of Ranger as a working K9, alert and imposing, another of Ranger curled up beside Ethan, soft-eyed and gentle. "This is the same dog," she said. "But the badge didn't make him loyal. The uniform didn't make him safe. He chose, over and over, to protect the vulnerable." A recruit asked, "How do you know when to break the rules?" Megan smiled, tired but sincere. "You don't always know. That's the risk. Sometimes you get burned. But if you're only ever safe, you're never truly helping anyone. The badge is a tool. It's what you do with it that matters." She passed around a copy of Ethan's drawing, the one with the 3 stick figures, sunlight and hope. "We're not just law enforcers," she said quietly. "We're caretakers. Don't forget that, even when it's hard." Public debate raged for months. Some people blamed Angela for running, some blamed the police, others blamed the system. But in time, as the town healed and the reforms stuck, a quieter consensus took root. Ethan was not just a case number. He was proof that change was possible if enough people stood up, bent the rules for the right reasons, and saw the human and animal hearts at stake. Megan wrote about all this in her final report, knowing few would read it all the way through. She ended with a question, simple but sharp. Would you turn away, or would you risk everything for someone the world has already given up on? She left that question for every parent, officer, social worker, and neighbor who might one day find themselves standing at the edge of their own desert, staring at a battered child and a loyal dog, wondering what to do next. That evening, Megan took Ranger and Ethan for a walk in the dusk. The air smelled of creosote and hope. Ethan ran ahead, shouting for Ranger to follow. Megan watched them, a child healed by love, a dog who'd crossed the boundaries of duty and family, and a world that, for all its failures, could still surprise her with moments of redemption. She thought of all the children, all the lost and nearly lost, and felt the weight of their stories settle gently on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a call. Because the lesson was clear. Justice was never finished, and neither was healing. The cracks would always be there, but so would the people willing to stand in them. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. 1 year after Ethan was found clinging to Ranger in the desert, the Arizona sun was gentler, less menacing, and Megan's small house had become something it had never been before. A home alive with laughter, learning, and second chances. The scars lingered, but now they lived side by side with hope, stitched into the fabric of daily life. Ethan woke early on the anniversary morning, his dreams still full of fire and loss, but now quickly replaced by the scent of pancakes and the familiar weight of Ranger's head beside him. He padded barefoot into the kitchen, where Megan, aproned, humming, welcomed him with a hug and a plate piled high. There was a new photograph on the fridge, Ethan and Angela, arms around each other, both smiling shyly at the camera, with Ranger sitting noble and proud at their feet. Breakfast was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Angela, carrying a basket of warm muffins and a stack of schoolbooks. She'd come a long way. Her hair was neatly brushed, her eyes clearer, her hands steady. She greeted Ethan with a gentle embrace, holding him just long enough to remind him, and herself, that coming back was possible, even after losing your way. Angela had found work at the local library, helping other parents navigate paperwork and court dates, translating bureaucratic language into something less terrifying. She never stopped attending her therapy sessions, and Megan often saw her sitting under the cottonwood in the yard, notebook open, writing letters of apology, hope, and love. After breakfast, the trio, Megan, Angela, and Ethan, drove to a nearby community center. They'd been invited to share their story with a group of at-risk families and caseworkers. The room was full of nervous parents, anxious kids, overworked social workers, and a few volunteers wearing T-shirts that read, "Listen, believe, heal." Megan watched as Ethan introduced Ranger to a shy, teary-eyed little girl clutching a battered teddy bear. The old dog lowered himself gently, letting the girl stroke his head, and Megan saw something pass between them. The silent understanding that even the most wounded can become protectors. Megan took the stage, her hands only shaking a little. "This is our story," she began, her voice strong and steady, "but it could be anyone's. What happened to us, what almost happened to Ethan, wasn't because of one bad person, but because of cracks in the system. But what saved us was compassion. It was the willingness to ask the uncomfortable questions, to break the rules when the rules were wrong, and to risk our own comfort for someone more vulnerable. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. It's easy to see people as problems. It's harder, but more important, to see them as possibilities. Angela spoke next, voice trembling but true. She spoke of running, of fear, of believing she was alone. She spoke of what it meant to be given a second chance, to be met with understanding instead of judgment. "We aren't just survivors," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "We're proof that healing is possible, even when it seems out of reach." Ethan, when his turn came, said only 6 words, but they silenced the entire room. "Thank you for not giving up." Afterwards, Megan met with lawmakers and advocates working to push through new legislation. The Desert Bonds Act, aiming to strengthen trauma-informed policies, improve record-keeping, and protect the rights of children to remain with therapy animals during investigations. She became a fixture at hearings, always with Ranger at her side. Her message was consistent. Don't just fix the paperwork, fix the heart of the system. The ripple effect spread. Local schools added programs for trauma support. Police received extra training. The foster system created a new division for animal-assisted therapy. Stories poured in. Kids with their own loyal dogs. Social workers who finally felt empowered to bend the rules for the right reasons. Angela and Megan, sometimes together and sometimes apart, spoke at shelters and schools, teaching the next generation that asking for help was not a weakness, and that compassion could change the course of a life. They visited hospitals and foster homes, sharing not only their pain, but the joy of finding family in unexpected places. Ranger, now gray-muzzled but still alert, was celebrated as a town hero. On his birthday, the mayor gave him a key to the city, tiny, engraved, and utterly useless, but cherished all the same. Ethan made a speech, hands shaking, eyes shining. "Ranger saved my life. Now I want to help save others." On the night of the anniversary, after the crowds and speeches faded, Megan sat on the back porch, her journal open on her lap. Ranger pressed close at her feet. She wrote not just about Ethan or Angela or herself, but about every small victory and every heartbreak that had taught her something true. Asterisk that real courage was risking love, knowing it might hurt. Asterisk that sometimes the right thing was the hardest thing to risk. That heroes rarely wore capes. They looked like tired officers, frightened mothers, old dogs, or little boys holding on with everything they had. She looked up at the starlit sky and thought about the first night. Ethan and Ranger alone in the desert, surrounded by darkness, yet holding on to each other with a faith the world couldn't explain. That was what she wanted everyone to remember. In the moments when the world seems indifferent, when rules say no and fear says run, the choice to reach out is what changes everything. Before bed, Megan watched Ethan kneel beside Ranger, comforting a new foster child, a boy silent with shock, clutching a threadbare blanket. Ethan didn't say much. He simply offered a gentle smile and rested his hand on Ranger's head, letting the boy feel the warmth and trust that had saved him once. In that quiet, Megan understood. Healing was not a destination, but a legacy. Every time they chose compassion, every time they broke a rule for kindness, every time they risked being hurt again, they made it easier for the next child, the next parent, the next lost soul to be found. The final lines of her journal for the night were simple, but full of hope. True loyalty and courage are often found in those society overlooks. The world can be cruel, and the cracks are everywhere. But one act of compassion, a hand extended, a rule bent, a dog's head offered in comfort, can start a chain reaction that changes lives. She closed her notebook, feeling the future open up. Uncertain, yes, but bright with possibility. So the next time you see a child or an animal lost in the desert, or a person drowning in rules and silence, remember Ethan and Ranger. Remember that even when the system fails, people and their bonds can save each other. And ask yourself, will you answer the call? Will you risk compassion, no matter the cost? Because in the end, that's how you change the world, one act of courage at a time.